Mary's story, her love for the town of Silent Hill, her illness, and her death forms the foundation of Silent Hill 2. Despite this, we only see her a few times during the course of the game. It's usually in the form of a flashback, a letter written by her, or some sort of a manifestation created by the town. This, of course, is deliberate. Keeping Mary away from the main events of the narrative and limiting our exposure to her allows the developers to obscure James's greatest sin, and later, his motivations for committing that sin. In the limited time we get with Mary, we see the worst sides of James, learn about the enduring hope she had for him despite his surly nature, and are introduced to many of Silent Hill 2's most complicated questions. We hear about Mary for the first time in the opening minutes of Silent Hill 2, when the letter James received from her is read out loud. As anyone who's finished the game knows, the letter isn't real. As the game progresses, the words begin to vanish, until it's nothing more than a blank piece of paper. This transformation will be complete after James's boss battle with Eddie, the first human he's killed since Mary days earlier. How exactly this letter came to exist in the first place is open to interpretation. Some would argue that James is just seeing what he wants to see, as in, the letter is a figment of his imagination. He wanted to return to Silent Hill to be punished for murdering Mary, and thus he hallucinated this letter into being to give himself a reason to go there. If that's your take, I do find it to be a perfectly acceptable one. As you'll see quite clearly in next month's epic on James to close out this series, I plan on honoring the various interpretations of his character on the road to providing my own. So if you're of the mind that James is just seeing what he wants to see when it comes to this letter, then by all means, you can definitely read it that way. But for me personally, I think it's more likely that the letter is a manifestation created by Silent Hill to draw James to the town, so he can be put through the trials and tribulations it has in store for him. The journey James is about to go on is specifically tailored, as shown by monsters like the Flesh Lips and the Mannequins, to establishments like Heaven's Night in the hospital to reflect his personal struggles during the months leading up to Mary's murder, and the guilt he felt in its aftermath. It reflects his desire to be a hero, and his repressed sexuality through Mary, his need to be punished every time Pyramid Head comes after him, and the many ways he can come to terms with his crime through its multiple endings. Thus, I think it makes sense to conclude that even this letter is the work of the town, providing him with a compelling reason to return to Silent Hill. And that is exactly what he does. He goes to Silent Hill in search of Mary, where he'll face a dark odyssey that will force him to face the truth of what he did to her. This letter serves as the game's inciting incident, is the thing that kicks the plot in motion, and sets the stage for all the events that follow. You could make a good argument that the murder of Mary is the game's inciting incident, but for a new player and James in this moment, it is the letter. In the letter, Mary tells James that she's gone to Silent Hill, a town they vacationed in earlier in their marriage. She says he always promised to bring her back here someday, but he never did, so now she's come here alone, and she'll be waiting for him in their special place. Before we move on, I think it's important to establish a few things about what Mary says here. First, if you're wondering how Mary and James vacationed in Silent Hill, of all places, a town that has multiple dead ends, dilapidated buildings, and monsters around every corner, the answer is that for people without a tragic past, for those who haven't been drawn to the town because of the terrible things that happened to them, or the terrible things they did to others, Silent Hill is just a quiet little New England resort town. At least, that's the way it works in the Silent Hill games that are more focused on the psychological aspects of the town, games like Silent Hill 2 and Downpour. The cult-focused entries like Silent Hill 1, Silent Hill 3, and Silent Hill 4, The Room, are a different beast entirely when it comes to how and why characters end up there. But regardless, the point is that to the everyday person, the town of Silent Hill would indeed look like a nice, chill place to go for a vacation. I spent a weekend in the type of town Silent Hill is based on with my wife back in the fall of 2016, when we were still dating. We were there for a wedding, at a hotel by the lake, ironically enough. It was a great time. Well, except for the drunk guy who told me I looked like Fred Durst. That wasn't cool. But hey, I guess that's what I get for mixing up Christina Aguilera and Avril Lavigne in my Maria video. But anyway, if the normal version of Silent Hill is anything like the place my wife and I visited, then I can totally understand why Mary loved it there. As for the context surrounding the letter, as James says himself after it's read out loud, at this point in the game, he thinks that Mary has been dead for 3 years. This sets up the player to think of James in a positive light. Here we have a sad, lonely widower who's been drawn back to a town that his departed wife once loved by a letter he supposedly received from her. It's such a brilliant introduction, the way the developers lead us to believe that James is a good man with heartfelt intentions, when the truth is that Mary died just 3 days ago, and that she didn't die of her disease. James killed her, and her body is in the back seat of his car, wrapped up in her bed sheets. All of that will be laid bare eventually, slowly, gradually, as the town of Silent Hill forces James to come to terms with his sins. But here and now, the contents of this letter seems like the core motivation for a man who cared deeply for his wife, lost her to an illness, misses her terribly, and now has the chance to reunite with her thanks to the powers of a haunted resort town. Focusing solely on Mary, I think that although this letter is either a figment of James's imagination or a manifestation of the town, there are some things we can learn from it in terms of the type of person she was and the state of their marriage prior to her illness. A thought I can't escape after listening to it a few times is the tone of regret in her words. James promised he'd take Mary back to Silent Hill when she was alive, but he didn't do it. You can tell how much she loved this place, and given that this letter is in some way a reflection of James's subconscious, I'd argue that this regret isn't truly Mary's, but his own. He knows he fucked up by not bringing her back here when she was healthy, and you could probably argue that this is a tacit acknowledgement from James's psyche that he wasn't always the best husband, even before he struggled to support Mary through her illness. But according to the letter, she's here now, in Silent Hill, waiting for him in their quote, special place. This creates a bit of a problem for James. This whole town was their special place, so he's not exactly sure where she's waiting for him. He considers a list of possible locations, including Rosewater Park and Lakeview Hotel, and plans to visit them in search of Mary. From there, quite a bit of time passes before we hear from Mary directly. But as James journeys through Silent Hill, we do hear about her quite a bit. He mentions her to Angela several times. He shows her the picture of Mary that he's kept with him, and uses her as a means of connecting with Angela, who's looking for her missing mother, someone else lost in the fog of Silent Hill. She also comes up several times with Maria, who, out of all the characters in the game, is usually the one that ends up reminding James that Mary is dead. As we discussed in last month's video on her, Maria is a dark mirror of Mary, an over-sexualized version of her that tempts James towards his selfish side, and tries to distract him from his true goal. Thus, it makes sense that it's Maria who usually attempts to remind James that Mary is gone, in an effort to divert his focus from what he set out to do when he first arrived in Silent Hill. But there's no character who gives us more insight into Mary than Lara. When James encounters her outside of the apartments, she's reading a letter, eerily similar to the one that led him here. She ends up running away from him, but before she does so, she yells at James, saying that he never really loved Mary anyway. Still unsure of what Mary meant when she said she'd be waiting for him in their special place, this comment prompts James to pursue Lara for much of the game's second act. She clearly knows something about Mary, which makes her a better lead than searching all over town based on the vague directions of the letter. When he does find her again, Lara explains that she knew Mary from when they were at the hospital together. This means that Lara is the only person in the game, other than James, who actually spoke to Mary, which makes her a great source of information on what she was like. In fact, given that we're later told that James visited Mary less and less as her disease progressed, it's likely that Lara knew more about the person Mary was in the last days of her life than James did. He might have been married to her for years, but people change every single day, and being chronically ill changes a person in significant ways, far more than just physically. Thus, although she's an 8-year-old girl, I find her to be a reliable resource as far as her impressions of Mary are concerned. She probably knew more about what she did to cope with the pain she was suffering from, and what she did to pass the time at the hospital than James did. Of course, this doesn't make James look good. Not in the least. Lara shouldn't know more about Mary, even under these circumstances, than the man who swore to love her in sickness and in health. But we'll talk more about that next month when I cover James. In any case, at this point, Lara still doesn't trust James, so she tricks him into going through an incredibly ominous set of double doors, saying that she left a letter from Mary in the room beyond them. Once he's inside, Lara locks him in, prompting a boss fight with the Flesh Lips. But eventually, once we reach Lakeview Hotel, Lara does give James a letter from Mary, and it's here at last we hear from his departed wife directly once again. The letter reads,
My dearest Laura, I'm leaving this letter with Rachel to give to you after I'm gone. I'm far away now, in a quiet, beautiful place. Please forgive me for not saying goodbye before I left. Be well, Laura. Don't be too hard on the sisters. And Laura, about James. I know you hate him because you think he isn't nice to me, but please, give him a chance. It's true, he can be a little surly sometimes, and he doesn't laugh much. But underneath, he's a really sweet person. I love you, Laura. I love you like my very own daughter. I wish things were different. I wish we could be happy together, like we talked about. Even so, I know you will have a good life. You're a strong, smart, beautiful girl. Happy 8th birthday, Laura. Your friend, Mary.
It's such an emotional letter, complemented by the fantastic voice acting. I've said this before, but I truly can't praise the remake's actors enough. They all did an amazing job, and I think Salome Gunnarsdottir, who plays both Mary and Maria, did a superb job of balancing both characters and delivering an excellent performance in some of the game's most emotional moments. But in any case, what we have here is a letter that was supposed to be delivered to Laura after Mary's death. It speaks to how young and innocent Laura is that she doesn't understand this. Any adult reading that letter would take one look at the opening phrase about her being far away in a quiet, beautiful place and know that she's talking about the afterlife. But at just 8 years old, Laura doesn't. After telling her to take it easy on the sisters, something I think we all know Laura would struggle with, Mary moves on to the topic of James. I don't think that many of us would dispute the idea that James was often unkind to Mary while she was sick, but what happened specifically that led Laura to feel this way about James isn't perfectly clear. It could simply be that James failed to visit Mary frequently as her illness progressed. We know that spending time with her at the hospital was a challenge for him. And as a result, the more time Laura spent with Mary, the more she probably wondered about James's absence, and eventually came to the conclusion that he wasn't nice to her. But it's also possible that she witnessed, or at least overheard, some of the worst moments from their marriage, conflicts they had while she was sick, not unlike the conversation we'll later hear during the long hallway segment. Of course, that moment focuses on Mary and her emotions at the time, but it's easy to imagine James lashing out in frustration, becoming distant, or failing to support Mary in her time of need. Personally, I think it's some of both. Laura probably came to believe that James wasn't nice to Mary because she noticed he wasn't around often, and saw how checked out he was when he was around. Despite all of this, Mary urges Laura to give James a chance. The question about whether or not James truly loved Mary will rage forever, and it's largely dependent on the ending you get. But make no mistake, this part of this letter is undeniable proof that Mary loved the shit out of him. She's on her deathbed, and she still takes the time to defend her husband to a little girl who she knows hates him. That's love right there, folks. To truly love someone, you have to be able to acknowledge the worst sides of a person and still see the good in them. And that's what Mary is doing here. She admits that he can be surly at times and that he's overly serious, but beneath it all, she believes he can be a sweet person. I'd say this is an accurate statement, especially as far as the remake's James Sunderland is concerned. Surly means to be bad-tempered and unfriendly, and as shown throughout the game, James isn't a nice person. He's self-centered, capable of flying off the handle with only the slightest provocation, and even when he is being helpful towards someone, there's a clear limit to the decency he's able to show. Consider his actions with Angela, for example. When he encounters her in Rosewater Park, he's happy to see her alive. He's not happy to see her personally. And in the Labyrinth, he snaps at her just moments after learning the terrible abuse she suffered at the hands of her father. Though she does antagonize him, it's far from what she needs at that moment. But just as there are times when he's surly, there are instances where James displays some shades of kindness, of the sweet personality that Mary believes lies beneath his off-putting exterior. Shortly before reading his letter, for example, he was joking with Laura about the last time she tricked him. And although, as I've said, his decency towards Angela is limited, I do believe that he genuinely wanted to team up with her both of the times he offered it. All of this is to say that Mary not only loved James, but truly saw the good in him as well. In fact, I'd go as far as to argue that her ability to see the good in others is her strongest character trait. Consider her bond with Laura. She became a friend and a mentor to a girl who is known to be mischievous. James isn't the only person Laura pulled tricks on. She stole Mary's letter from Rachel's locker, and in that letter, Mary tells her to take it easy on the sisters, implying that not even the nuns were spared from this 8-year-old's antics. I think it's likely that Laura pulled pranks on Mary too, and that they became friends because Mary remained kind and welcoming towards her while other adults lashed out at her or tried to correct her behavior. Tying all of this together, it really is stunning how much this rather short letter tells us about Mary's personality. She saw the best in everyone, and was good enough of a person herself that she didn't view Lara as just some maladjusted orphan prankster, but a sweet little girl who just needed a friend. And by the end of her life, she had such a positive bond with Lara that she wanted to adopt her, which makes up the next part of the letter. When you combine this with what she said earlier about giving James a chance, I'm inclined to believe that at the time she wrote the letter, her ideal outcome was James taking in Lara to raise as his own. Obviously, there are plenty of hurdles to this, even aside from the matter of James's crime. Adoption doesn't go down the way it does in the movies. But this is one possible interpretation of the Leave ending, which adds to my personal appreciation for that conclusion to the game. To be clear, I'm not saying that this letter openly suggests that she wanted this. Rather, that if you read between the lines, James adopting Lara was probably her dream, her fantasy, the thing she hoped to look down from the heavens and see after her death. If so, it continues to speak to the sweet side that she believed lie beneath his surly exterior. She knew her husband was kind of a dick, but she still had enough faith in him that she idealized a future where he raised the little girl she came to look at as a daughter during her time in the hospital. That says a lot about Mary's love for James, her love for Lara, and her enduring hope in everyone around her. The deeper I get into this essay, the more I'm struck by that last point. Everywhere you turn, there's evidence that Mary was an exceptional human being, which makes what we're about to learn all the more tragic, and the long hallway conversation all the more heartbreaking. Critically, the letter ends with Mary wishing Lara a happy 8th birthday. When asked about this, Lara reveals that she just turned 8, meaning that this letter is recent, and thus Mary can't have died 3 years ago, as James has long believed. This is our first explicit hint that James is wrong about the game's timeline, and by ending her letter this way, Mary unknowingly sets up the game's most shocking revelation. Not long after reading the letter, James reaches room 312, the quote, special place mentioned in Mary's original letter from the beginning of the game. He searched practically the entire town, from Rosewater Park to Brookhaven Hospital. Now, he's finally found the place he was looking for. James puts the videotape Maria mentioned to him in the VCR, and for the first minute or so, it shows a happy scene from their marriage, from the trip they took to Silent Hill. Mary talks about how much she loves the town, says the whole area was once considered to be a sacred place, and then makes James promise to bring her here again someday. She then coughs, which most theorize to mean that this is the moment when her illness started. Taking this a step further, many speculate that the disease itself is linked to Silent Hill. According to information you can find in the Historical Society, Brookhaven Hospital was originally set up for victims of an epidemic that spread from Toluca Lake. This would help to explain the disease's incurable nature. If she caught a rare disease that hadn't been seen since this epidemic, then it makes sense that doctors would have been unsure of how to treat it. It also aligns with the Maria ending, where she coughs before her and James reach his car, starting the cycle all over again. Personally, I've always liked the idea that Mary's illness was something found in our own world, like perhaps a form of cancer, because I think it helps ground the story despite all the supernatural elements. But I have to admit that I agree with these theories, and think that Mary is indeed suffering from a recurrence of this epidemic. After Mary coughs, the scene shifts to her bedroom. Though the camera makes frequent cuts and shows several points of view, the end result is clear. James kills Mary by suffocating her with a pillow. This is undoubtedly Silent Hill 2's most important scene. It recontextualizes the entire narrative. Mary didn't die of her disease 3 years ago. James killed her just 3 days ago. Before we examine the murder from Mary's perspective in detail, there are a few things we need to establish about the events surrounding it. First, this scene takes place at James and Mary's house. In her real letter, which will be read aloud to us in the Leave and in Water endings, Mary mentions that the doctors had given her permission to come home for a bit. So the murder happened at his house, not in the hospital. James might be a Konami protagonist, but he isn't Solid Snake. If he did this with doctors and nurses around, he would have been taken straight to jail. If you're curious about where they lived, specifically, some fans speculate that they lived in Ashfield, where part of Silent Hill 4, The Room, is set. Second, in the comments section for previous videos I've made on Silent Hill 2, some folks have suggested that Mary's death might have been something that her and James planned together. As in, James and Mary decided to commit what was essentially an active assisted suicide during her last trip home. I'll concede that this is a possibility. As we'll discuss later on, the long hallway conversation is not the last time they spoke before she died, meaning that they could have decided to do this together at some point thereafter. But I disagree with this theory, because in the video, we see James sneak up on Mary, and when he smothers her, she resists. Some folks have pointed out that resisting in a moment like this is human nature. I will concede that this too is a fair point. It's horribly depressing to think about, but a therapist I worked with at my last job told me that there's strong evidence that people who take their own life often relent in the final moments, after it's too late to change the path they're on. As an example of this, he mentioned that if a person drives off a cliff with this intention, you can tell based on the tire tracks they left behind that they tried to slow down or even brake before they went over the edge, potentially indicating a change of heart. It's human nature to resist, to fight for one's life, no matter how terribly a person might be feeling, no matter what awful thoughts they might be thinking, and no matter what plans they've made. So it's possible that this is what we're seeing here from Mary, even if they planned her death. Still, I remain opposed to this theory from a thematic perspective as well. If James and Mary planned this, then the crux of the narrative falls apart in my view. We are supposed to sit back and debate whether this was a mercy killing, a murder committed for selfish reasons, or some combination of both. That's what allows the game's 6 true endings to exist, but for the debate around James's motivation to rage. If Mary's death was planned, then there's no need for any of that, and James's guilt and need for punishment would be significantly lessened. It would remove all of the ambiguity, and this game's narrative thrives on ambiguity. So while you're welcome to disagree, and though I'll concede that it is an acceptable theory, I truly do not believe that Mary's death was something her and James planned. Thus, if this indeed wasn't planned, in analyzing Mary's murder, 2 subjects arise: James's motivations and Mary's wishes. We'll spend plenty of time on the first question in August, but this video is about Mary, so let's focus on her end of this for now. Did Mary want to die? The answer in the grand scheme of things differs dramatically depending on what ending you prefer. As you'll soon see, in the Maria ending, Mary says that she didn't want to die. In Leave, she says that she wanted the pain to end, and in the letter that's read aloud in Leave and in Water, she makes similar comments. But again, James sneaks up on her, and when he begins to suffocate her, she resists. To me, that suggests that even if she was ready to die and wanted the end to come so her suffering would be over, this isn't how she wanted her life to come to a close. Following this earth-shattering revelation, James is forced to deal with some of his most difficult challenges yet. Admitting what he did to Lara, battling not 1 but 2 Pyramid Heads, and facing off with her, the game's final boss. But before we get there, there's more characterization for Mary we need to see, all of which takes place in a moment I've referred to a few times now, the long hallway conversation. After defeating the 2 Pyramid Heads, James will enter a long hallway, where the following conversation will play out. Whether or not you listen to the entire conversation helps determine what ending you get. Listening to it in full helps trigger Leave and in Water, while speeding through the hallway supports the Maria ending. Let's listen to it in its entirety, and then break it all down.
What do you want, James? Flowers? I don't want any damn flowers. Just go home already. Look at me. I'm disgusting. Between the disease and the drugs, I look like a monster. Well, what are you looking at? Get the hell out of here. Leave me alone already. I'm no use to anyone. I'll be dead soon anyway. It'd be easier if they just killed me. But I guess the hospital's making a nice profit off of me. Why are you still here? I told you to go. Are you deaf? Don't come back. James. Wait. Please. Don't go. Don't leave me alone. I didn't mean what I said. Please. Tell me it'll be okay. Tell me I'm not gonna die. Help me.
Silent Hill 2 is full of difficult to watch moments, but there are a few that I struggle with more than this one. It's a raw, unfiltered look at one of the bleakest moments from Mary's life. If you're curious about what happens if you sprint through the long hallway, as I did on this playthrough, you'll pass through the door right before the conversation's tonal shift. To me, this symbolizes that in this version of events, James only remembers how poorly Mary treated him when he came to visit her, not the profound and overwhelming emotions she was dealing with at the time, which is why she lashed out at him in such uncharacteristic fashion. That's why speeding through the hallway helps trigger the Maria ending, because that version of James is so self-centered that he can only think about how Mary's illness affected him, not how it, understandably, broke a woman who is so often defined by her kindness and her overwhelming faith in the goodness of other people. And to me, I think that's the key takeaway from the long hallway conversation. Up until this point, Mary has been presented as something of a saint. She cared for Lara even though she probably played pranks on her and antagonized nuns, and she loved James even though she knows he's kind of an asshole. This conversation on her end is about emphasizing how her disease not only wreaked havoc on her physically, but emotionally as well. We see this right from the moment James arrives. He showed up with flowers for her, but Mary doesn't think she deserves them because of how monstrous the disease has made her look and feel. Before all this, she probably would have been overjoyed to get flowers from James, but not here and now. From there, her dialogue becomes depressingly cynical. She claims that it'd be better off if she just died, but that if she did, it would ruin the hospital's opportunity to make money off her. The financial stress Mary's illness brought to her and James's marriage is a point I don't often hear folks bring up when it comes to their situation, but there's no doubt that it affected them deeply. Considering she was likely suffering from a disease that hadn't been seen in centuries with no available cure, I can only imagine how much money all of this cost them. But back to the conversation, after saying all of these incredibly depressing things, Mary then shouts at James and yells at him to go away. But once he does begin to leave, her tone shifts and she begs him to come back. She then starts to cry and pleads with him to tell her that she's not going to die, that she's going to get better, and most importantly, she asks him to help her. It's one of many tragic subjects this game touches on, but this, unfortunately, is a fairly realistic representation of how many folks respond when they're placed in hospice care and they know they're going to die. Mood swings like this, especially from people who are normally calm and temperate, are commonplace. When I first played Silent Hill 2 as a teenager, I didn't understand this at all. But when I played the remake, I was only a few years removed from hearing about how my 93-year-old grandmother used to try and fight off the orderlies when she only had a couple of months left to live. This was a woman whose most intrusive behaviors were flicking water at me while I was playing video games and barging into my Game of Thrones watch parties at the worst possible moments. Most of the time, she was very kind, always had chocolate to share, and was known for walking around the neighborhood even when it became difficult for her to do. Around the same time, a good friend of mine confessed how difficult it was caring for his terminally ill mother, because she'd often yell at him about mistakes he made years ago, and then beg him to put her out of her misery. All of this is to say that Mary's harsh words and mood swings here are a normal part of end-of-life care, and shouldn't be taken as an indication of her personality at large, or how she treated James throughout their marriage. This conversation aside, everything suggests that Mary was an exceptional person. This is nothing more than a moment of weakness, an entirely understandable one at that, intended to humanize a woman who's been presented to us as essentially flawless up to this point in the game. To show us how Mary's illness devastated not only her body, but her spirit, taking someone who is known to be incredibly kind and changing her into someone whose disposition often shifted quickly between anger and depression. This brutal honesty and authenticity is a huge part of what makes Silent Hill 2 such an excellent game, and Mary such a fantastic character, and that we're able to understand the scope of the damage the illness did to her despite seeing so little of her. Before we move on, there are two more things I'd like to clarify about this segment. First, as mentioned earlier, this was not the last time Mary and James spoke before her death. This conversation took place at the hospital she stayed at, not their house. She obviously wouldn't be telling him to leave if they were at their house, nor would she be referring to the doctors the way she does here, all of which indicates that she's still at the hospital. This means, timeline-wise, that Mary's letter, which mentions her impending trip home and is read aloud to us in the Leave and in Water endings, was likely written after the long hallway conversation. It's important to bring this up because I've seen folks reference the long hallway conversation in one way or another when trying to deduce Mary's mindset at the time of the murder, and while it is definitely something to consider when trying to figure that out, it's still important to note that the letter was written closer to her death, and is likely a stronger representation of what she was thinking and how she was feeling about her mortality when she made her final trip home. Second, circling back to our earlier discussion about Lara overhearing interactions between James and Mary, I can't help but wonder if she overheard parts of the long hallway conversation, and if that's why she hates James as much as she does. I'd imagine that Mary probably tried to keep up a brave face around Lara, and thus it's possible that if she heard this conversation in particular, she'd conclude that James didn't really love Mary, because meeting with him prompted such an extreme reaction in her, an emotion she'd never seen from her before. Ultimately, as brutal as the long hallway conversation is to listen to, it's a critical look into Mary's life, her personality, her struggles, her fears, and how her illness changed her. And for some players, it's also the last time they'll hear from Mary, in one form or another. Because from here on out, your interactions with her depend on the ending you get. To work through these endings in a way that makes sense as far as character analysis is concerned, we're going to start with In Water, move on to the two new endings, talk about Rebirth, and then close out with Maria and Leave, which I consider to be the two most important endings when it comes to understanding Mary, because those are the ones where we actually hear from her the most. In the In Water ending, James encounters who he thinks is Mary at the top of Lakeview Hotel, but he quickly deduces that it's not really Mary at all. It's Maria, disguised as Mary. A boss fight with her then ensues, and once it's over, we see James behind the wheel of his car. He says that he can't go on without Mary, and that even though what he's about to do isn't what she'd want, none of that matters now. In the remake, he even takes a look at the backseat of his car, confirming the long-held theory that he'd been keeping her body back there all along. He then drives the car into the Toluca, ending his life, and submerging both himself and Mary's body in the waters of the lake that likely got her sick in the first place. Mary's letter is then read aloud as it descends to the depths below. I'll be taking a close look at the letter when we get to the Leave ending, but I will note that it seems to be read in a more sorrowful tone here than it is in Leave. It might be a separate take, or maybe it's just because the music is different, but it definitely sounds more depressing to me. Such a tone certainly fits the theme of this ending, which sees James take his own life to join Mary. As far as Mary's thoughts and feelings are concerned, I suspect James is right when he says that this isn't what she would want. It's important to remember that In Water is an ending where James accepts what he did. It's not like Maria, where the game calls him out for his selfishness. In fact, in the original game, before the In Water ending, James gets a final conversation with Mary that is similar to the one he has with her in Leave. In terms of content, it's quite different, but functionally it is similar. Thus, I have a hard time believing that even after everything, Mary would have wanted James to end his own life like this. And given that James knows it, I'd argue that it's a sign, even though he has come to terms with what he did, he's still full of the same selfishness that, to some degree, especially in this version of events, motivated him to kill her. Now, let's talk about Stillness, the first of the two new endings to the game. In Stillness, we actually do hear from Mary. Stillness starts off just like In Water. James is in his car as the rain comes pouring down, and he has every intention of driving it into the lake. But during his monologue, Mary reaches out to him, touches his face, and essentially soothes him. He then asks if she'll wait for him, and she promises that she always will. While it's made very clear that Mary isn't actually in the car with him and is instead either a figment of his imagination or a manifestation of the town, I find this to be closer to what she probably would have wanted in this moment. Not exactly what she would have wanted, but close to it, for him to move on. I say this because, just like with In Water, this is an ending where James accepted what he did, and isn't portrayed as completely selfish, as he is in the Maria ending. And thus, in this ending, though James still drives the car into Toluca Lake, it sounds like he jumps out at the last minute, allowing him to move on and put everything that happened in Silent Hill behind him. In the second new ending to the game, Bliss, when James puts the videotape into the VCR, the game ends right then and there. He never sees himself murder Mary. In fact, Mary doesn't even cough the way she does in the original videotape. James, dressed as he is in the game, with flashlight and all, appears and hugs Mary. I'll have more to say about this next month, but in the interest of keeping the focus on Mary, what I'll say for now is that this is an interesting look at what her relationship with James might have been like if it weren't for the illness. It seems like he really did make her happy, just as she says in her letter. In Rebirth, Maria once again appears dressed as Mary, but James deduces this even more quickly than before, and says that he doesn't need Maria anymore, because he has a plan to bring the real Mary back through the magic of Silent Hill. Needless to say, I think Mary would be horrified by this plan. As much as she loved the town, I'm sure she wouldn't have wanted the old gods of Silent Hill to bring her back to life, not for a husband who's once again showing his selfishness in doing so. Which brings us to the final two endings we'll be examining in this video, Maria and Leave. I've left these two for last because unlike the others, which were essential to cover for the sake of being thorough, but didn't include all that much from Mary, she is heavily featured in Maria and in Leave, and they provide us with the most insight to her personality and how she feels about James's crime. Before we dive into Mary's appearance in the Maria ending, let's make sure we're clear about the circumstances it takes to get this ending in the first place, and what all of it suggests about the type of person this version of James is. To trigger Maria, James needs to stick close to Maria throughout the game, protect her diligently during combat, and avoid looking at the Great Knife, which helps to trigger in water, as well as Mary's picture and Mary's letter, both of which help to trigger Leave. Other contributing factors include interacting with Maria at conversation points throughout the game, speeding through the long hallway, choosing the ripe apple for the mirror puzzle, and going through the scarlet-colored door after the boss fight with the two pyramid heads. In choosing all of these options, the player is forging a version of James that views Maria as a replacement for Mary, and has embraced all of the selfish, base desires that Maria represents. So as we break down what Mary says here, keep in mind that it's this version of James that she's talking to, not the versions of James that we see in some of the other endings. In the Maria ending, James isn't talking to Maria dressed as Mary, he's actually talking to Mary. James calls out to her, and she responds by saying that it's been so long, and asking, sorrowfully, if he really wanted to see her. He says yes, that it's all he's ever wanted, but she calls him out on his bullshit right away, and states, point blank, that he killed her. Again, he tries to weasel his way out of it, saying that he couldn't bear to see her suffer. Once more, she sees through his nonsense, and tells him not to make excuses. She says that she knows how he viewed her, that she was a burden that he wanted to get rid of. Shockingly, James admits to this, and reasons that it was a long 3 years for him, and that he was so tired. In doing so, he's clearly demonstrating the selfishness represented by this ending. Selfishness that, in this version of events, drove him to kill her. With a sigh, Mary acknowledges that what his life with her had turned into was far from what he wanted, and he wished for a long, happy, fulfilling life. From there, Mary becomes more bold and forceful with her questioning, asking James if Maria, his chosen replacement, will be able to give him what he wants. For a third time now, James pleads with Mary to listen to him, but she's done with him. Finally, she accuses him of robbing her of the last precious moment she had, asks how she could ever forgive him, and then transforms into her, the game's last boss. Out of all the endings, this is the only one where Mary, and not Maria, becomes her. And that is rather significant if you ask me. As for how this happens, though it is left open to interpretation, I believe that in the Maria ending, it is indeed Mary's spirit, lingering in the town of Silent Hill after her death, a place she loved that James is talking to in this scene. I say this because in the next ending we'll be covering, Leave, James also talks to Mary, has a very candid conversation with her, and receives the letter that he's been after all along. In my view, the only way these two scenes work is if this is actually Mary he's talking to here. If she's completely a manifestation of the town, or if he's just hallucinating, then I think it robs the Maria ending of its powerful tone of condemnation, and the Leave ending of its catharsis. Thus, for the how, I think it is indeed Mary's spirit he's talking to in this scene, but I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on this down in the comments. As for the why, while that too is open to interpretation, I believe that it has everything to do with James's actions throughout the game. The brilliant thing about Silent Hill 2's narrative is that James's crime doesn't change. No matter how you approach the game, he killed Mary. But depending on the ending you get, his motivations for doing so do change. That's a huge part of what makes Silent Hill 2 such an incredibly well-written game, and what will make analyzing James for next month's entry in this series particularly challenging. Therefore, what I'd argue is that in the Maria ending, Mary is aware of the way James has behaved around Maria throughout the game. She knows that he's attracted to her, that he's come to view her as his replacement wife. In light of this, she's now certain that James killed her not out of mercy, but for selfish reasons. As stated in her letter to Lara, she has long known that he's an asshole, but always believed that he had a sweet side beneath all of that. On the path to the Maria ending, James spat on that belief. Thus, she appears as an avenging demon rather than an angel of absolution, as she doesn't leave. Overall, as strong as it is narratively, I view the Maria ending as the game's quote, bad ending, because it not only gives us a version of James that is disgustingly selfish and chauvinistic, but a version of Mary that was forced to become a monster in order to try and punish him for his sins. And finally, we've at last come to Leave. Just like we did with Maria, let's begin by examining the circumstances it takes to get this ending and what it suggests about this version of James. You can help to influence the Leave ending by keeping James's health up and neglecting Maria when possible, namely by letting her take damage during fights, avoiding talking with her at extra conversation points, and not checking in with her during the labyrinth and hospital levels. Listening to the entire long hallway conversation, using the rust-colored egg after the fight with Pyramid Head, and not looking at Angela's knife more than once will also count as points in Leave's favor. But in both the remake and the original, what seems to have the most influence, at least to me anyway, is looking at Mary's letter and picturing your inventory more than once. In fact, on the playthrough you're watching now, I didn't follow any of the advice I just mentioned, other than looking at the letter and the picture several times before the double boss fight with Ornstein and Smo. I mean Pyramid Head and Pyramid Head. So if you're having trouble getting Leave yourself, just reload to around that point, look at those items, and you should be good to go. But regardless, when you examine all those factors, what it suggests about the Leave ending is that the player has forged a version of James who is reflective, who knows he committed a grave sin, and seeks the punishment he knows he deserves from Pyramid Head, and longs for catharsis through one last meeting with Mary. Leave starts out just like in Water, with James identifying that he isn't talking to Mary, but Maria disguised as Mary, and then acknowledges that this thing with her needs to end, and that he needs to move on. All this represents acceptance of what he did. He's come to terms with the reality that he killed Mary, and he's ready to face the truth. After defeating her, he's then awarded with a final conversation with Mary, which takes place in what appears to be their bedroom in their home, the same place where he killed her. Though she's still coughing and disfigured by her disease, she's clearly happy to see him. It's impossible to overstate just how affectionate she is in this scene. She opens it by calling him handsome. James then apologizes for what he did, and she responds by saying that she told him she was ready for the pain to end. James takes a moment to reckon with this before replying that he didn't kill her out of mercy. He did it because he wanted her out of the way, because he wanted his life back. And yet, Mary dismisses this, reasoning that if he truly did it for selfish reasons, then why does he look so sad? This exchange functionally makes this conversation here in Leave the opposite of the pre-boss fight conversation with Mary in the Maria ending. In the Maria ending, James initially tells Mary that he killed her because he didn't want to watch her suffer, gets called out by Mary, and then admits that he did it because he was tired. But here, in Leave, James starts by saying that he did it for selfish reasons, only to have that viewpoint dismissed by Mary not once, but twice. In response to Mary's second dismissal, James isn't sure what to say. Personally, I've long thought that he, in this moment, is stunned by Mary's continued faith in him, and his continued fear that she's wrong, and that his guilty conscience is right. He then takes her by the hand, but once more, Mary tells him that it's okay, before handing him her letter, a letter he shares with Laura. The letter starts out the way it did at the beginning of the game, with Mary telling James that she's waiting for him in Silent Hill. She then goes on to say that because he hasn't come yet and found her, which is some strong fuel for the loop theory, she's stuck waiting for him, wrapped in her cocoon of pain and loneliness, feeling pathetic and ugly. She then says that she's done a terrible thing to him, more evidence of her constant kindness. Even at one of her lowest points, she was worried about the impact her illness had on James. From there, the letter transitions to a discussion of the events that led up to her death. She explains that the doctor has given her permission to go home, not because she's getting better, but because she might not have another opportunity to do so. Mary then states that while she misses James and is happy to be coming home, she's also afraid that he doesn't want her to come home. She says that she knows how hard all of this has been on him. I'm sure that as she wrote this, she was thinking of what happened in the long hallway conversation, which probably took place shortly before the doctor informed her that she could go home for a bit. The next section of the letter is more reflective, as Mary explains that when she was first diagnosed, she couldn't accept it, and took out her anger on everyone close to her, especially James. Not only is this the case with folks who are terminally ill, as we discussed earlier, but it's often true for anyone dealing with any form of trauma. We tend to lash out at those who we believe will continue to support us and care for us no matter what. Turning to James specifically, she writes that no matter what, she wants him to know that she will always love him, and that she's sorry that their life together had to end like this. But still, she wouldn't trade what they had for the world. Mary then expresses that she's ready to die, and that she wants the pain to end, so James can remember her for who she was, and not what the disease turned her into. Finally, she tells him that she wants him to move on, to live for himself and for others, because he made her happy. And appropriately, as the letter concludes, we see James leave Silent Hill with Lara by his side. Looking at the letter as a whole, while she certainly doesn't indicate that she wanted James to do what he did, she does make statements similar to those she said in their earlier conversation, that she wanted the pain to end. When you combine all of that, it suggests to me that in this ending, Mary likely views her own death as a mercy killing, and has forgiven James for what he did. And I think the strongest evidence of that is the fact that Lara leaves Silent Hill with James, after reading the very same letter. Remember, the last time James and Lara spoke, she found out that he killed Mary. If this letter and whatever James told her about his final conversation with Mary didn't convince her that she'd absolved him, do you really think Lara would have left Silent Hill with him? I don't think so. I think she would have run the other way. Where James and Lara would have gone from here is open to debate. Perhaps they simply buried Mary's body in the graveyard, or maybe he is going to take her in as his own. But I do believe that this is the ending Mary would have wanted, for the two people she loved the most, for the two abrasive people who she always saw the best in, to leave Silent Hill and move forward into the future. Of course, whether you agree that James killed Mary out of mercy, for selfish reasons, or some combination of both, is up to you. But there's no doubt in my mind that in the Leave ending, Mary believes it was out of mercy, and has dispensed her own form of mercy upon James, forgiving him for his sin. As far as her character is concerned, I'd argue that James's motivations don't really matter, because what this ending demonstrates is that Maria is defined by her unconditional love. Her unconditional love of a mischievous girl who she wanted to adopt. Her unconditional love of a surly man in whom she saw a softer side. And her unconditional love of a husband who she refuses to believe killed her out of selfishness and instead did so for mercy. In this ending, Mary sees the best in this version of James. There's beauty and tragedy in this mindset all at the same time. Beauty in her overwhelming faith in her husband, and tragedy in that she deserved so much better from James. To me, that's part of what I think makes the Leave ending so powerful. For a character with such little agency in this game, at the end, Mary at least gets the conclusion she would have wanted. I'm not sure that Leave is what James deserves, but I do believe that it is what Mary, unconditional love made manifest, would have wished for as her soul passed through the town that she loved so very much. And that's what makes Mary so important to Silent Hill 2. Thanks for watching. Huge thanks to Mathias T. Taylor, David Peppiatt, and Solice, who allowed me to use their music for this video. To check out all three of these amazing artists, just follow the links down below in the description box. Big shout out to all my Silver and Gold tier YouTube channel members and Patreon subscribers, including James Pruitt, Little Caesar, Reed, Chthonian, Anna Novikova, Sean Bobby, and Draco Woloski, who get early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 to $10 a month. See you guys next time, and go birds!